So on this little flatty project, I'm gonna have to jump around a little bit. Reason being is I'm on a time crunch to get this done. Like I said, I'm trying to go to the fall color tour in Colorado, and I just don't have everything I need right now. So transmission is out. It's over there on the engines or the transmission stand. Tomorrow I'm going down to Phoenix and picking up a couple transmissions, SM420s. I had my builder buddy doesn't like the reverse gear, not the idler, but the main reverse gear. So pick up a couple more trannies, see if I can find him one that will work. So I got all this stuff laid out, kind of at a halt on the transmission part of that project, but I am gonna get started on some axles. So on these axles, I'm going to do a center drive Dana 44. This would be like out of a 72 Cj3a or Commando, or I think that's about it, 72 Cj3a. It's a flange 44, it's center drive. That'll mash up to my center drive I'm gonna have on my Dana 300 transfer case. And then the front, I'm doing a narrow track 30. So I'm gonna show some clips of me tearing these down. Basically the game plan is to tear the axles down, wire brush the housings, get them all cleaned out, get all the parts cleaned up, put them in the Jeep. I won't be able to weld the rear pads in. I have to cut the pads off the rear. They're too wide for the flat fender. Cut the pads off the rear, get the housings in the Jeep, and I'll probably get the front one in first and start building the front out. It's a lot easier to build an axle in a vehicle. It's holding it for you. So the housing will be cleaned up, painted, installed, then I'm gonna start assembling it. And like I said, I'll show some clips of that, the disassembly, anything to keep an eye on when you're disassembling, and just some tips and tricks as I go along. And then I will cover the building and so I got a lot of parts for the front end and rear end already, and then more parts are rolling in this later this week. So I got all Yukon gears, Yukon master overhaul kits, Yukon limited slip for the rear, Spartan limited slip, helical limited slip for the front, chromoly shafts for the front, new Spicer joints, Moog ball joints, all new seals and bearings, wheel bearings, all new brake hardware, and if I have time, I'm going to try to install these LED Pro Comp headlights. A little tricky on the flat fenders. You got to cut the back of the buckets out, but I'll show that if I get to it too. So just keep watching, liking. So before I start tearing into like a junkyard axle, I'd like to do a little visual inspection to make sure I don't see anything massively wrong before I get started. So I'll kind of walk through what I go through in my head. So axle spins freely, no excessive play. I mean, the brakes are obviously not there. Backing plates are a little wonky, but I'll straighten out a few of these spots. They do look pretty true. Like I said earlier, I'm gonna have to cut these perches off. When you take this apart, I'll save all the hardware. Try to reuse as much as possible. Like wheel cylinder bolts, we'll reuse these flange bolts. I'm gonna pull the cover and check the gears. And this backing plate, pretty straight too. Like I said, I'll straighten out some of these small spots. This axle turns freely. Brakes are off, obviously missing on this side too. Pinion yoke is pretty much junk, so I have a bucket of yokes over here. I'll get one. I'm sure I have something that'll work. And that's kind of my little once over. I'll start tearing it down. So on the tear down, to get the carrier out of axles, axle shafts go into the carrier. Can't get the carrier out without pulling them. So I'm gonna remove the axle flange bolts, take a slide hammer, pop the axles out, both sides. Then I will take the cover off. This doesn't have oil in it, but if it did, good idea is to pull the cover and let it drain while you're pulling the axle shafts. Get the axle shafts out, go over to the cover side, pull the carrier out, look at the gears, make sure the caps are on correctly. I'll go over that. And pull the carrier, check bearing condition, that kind of stuff. And then get the pinion out of it, get the bear housing all cleaned up and pads cut off, and then install it and start the reassembly. So before I pulled these backing plates off, I went around with a pair of water pump pliers and a crescent wrench and kind of straightened them out. So you can see pretty straight now. I might fine tune them a little bit when I get them cleaned up and can see them better. But yeah, if you can't fix things, if you're just kind of a buy stuff and put it on type person, I wouldn't suggest rebuilding or trying to redo a old Jeep project. You're gonna hit some walls real quick. Like these backing plates, they're not available anywhere. So you're gonna have to find them, fix them, something. And if you don't have the ability to do that or the want to do that, I really wouldn't suggest doing a project like this because you're just gonna get frustrated. So I've got this axle unbolted. I'm gonna grab a slide hammer and pull that out. I just got a couple nuts holding that one. Pull that out and then I'll start on the center section. So I got both axles out. This setup is almost identical to like a TJ or JK application. It actually uses the same bearings, so a set 10. The only difference is JKs use a different axle seal and the flange shape here is a little different on both TJs and JKs. This axle does use an inner axle seal also. So there's an inner axle seal. You pack the bearing with wheel bearing grease instead of like on a TJ JK application. They're relying on the gear oil to run down the tube and lubricate these bearings. There's an inner seal and an outer seal, and you pack these with grease. So if you do these old Jeep axles, make sure you're aware of what's going on and catch things like an inner seal here. This is the race for the bearing. They're kind of lightly held together when you put them on new, but it's not uncommon for them to stay in the housing like this when you pull the axle out. So I'm gonna get a slide hammer, pull that out, pull the seal out, sight the axle and make sure it's straight before I go any farther. The nice thing about these flange 44s is the axle shafts are the same length, right and left. And I'll get the backing plates off, get this stuff pulled apart and all cleaned up too. There was one little thing that kind of concerned me over here. I need to get a wire brush and stick my finger inside the end here and see if this is a dent from the inside out or if this is remnants of like pads that were welded on the top for spring over or something. So not sure what's going on there, but I'll get that figured out, make sure it's straight and keep making progress. So the axles are out. I took this long tube I've had for years. You can see it's pretty mushroomed. Actually, the mushroom helps a little bit. When you're pounding seals out, you can catch them and tap them out. So I got the seals knocked out and I checked that spot out on the tube. That's just something on the outside, so I'll grind that smooth. Then I pulled the cover and surprise, surprise, no carrier, no gears. So you never know what you're gonna get from a junkyard. Luckily the caps are on there and they are the correct caps. They're just not in the correct orientation. So see, there's a little end there and there's an end there. So this cap needs flipped 180 and end there and end up there. So that cap needs flipped 180. They're on the right side, they just upside down. Pinion looks like it's shot and I'm assuming that's why there's no carrier in here. It doesn't look like the journals are spun or anything. And I'm not seeing any huge, there's a little gouging down here. I can smooth that out, but nothing irreparable. See, there's a little damage up there, little gouging down there. I'll smooth some of that stuff out. But like I said, there's nothing that's irreparable. These castings are pretty thick. A lot thicker than the earlier ones and a lot thicker than the castings nowadays. So I'll get in there with like a little carbide burr, smooth that stuff out and polish it out. You'll never see it. Next step is get the pinion out. So loosen the pinion nut, take the pinion yoke off, tap the pinion out, pop the seal out, see if there's a slinger or anything in there. If there's not, I'll drive the races out. This inner bearing, there will be shims under the race, so I need to keep track of those to help me on my setup. And I'll show you what I mean when I get the pinion out. So a ring gear bolt sitting right there between the inner and outer pinion bearings. Surprise, surprise! Once again, you'll never know what you're gonna find in a junkyard rear end. So I got the pinion out here on the bench, and I'm gonna take these are the pinion preload shims. These shims right here control the distance between the bearing cups. You have the cast housing here in a fixed position with the cups, and these shims control how tight the bearings are allowed to go into the cups to set the pinion preload. So we're gonna slip those off, so you can see there's quite a stack there. I'm gonna save these. They'll help me when setting it up. It'll give me a good starting point. This is not saying this is the end all be all, but this is a good starting point. And I'm gonna use my Yukon bearing puller here. I've used this thing so much that it's kind of wore out. These are no longer adjustable. They're kind of in a fixed position, and the little tip that pushes down keeps falling off. So bear with me if I have any technical difficulties. Great tool. I've just used this one so much I've wore it out. So the way this works is we're gonna slip this on. It works like a clamshell power steering pump puller. So this is gonna slip on. These two clamshells are gonna go down here and grab the pinion bearing. And we're gonna pull it off. The reason I'm pulling this bearing off is you can shim the pinion depth with the shim under the bearing or under the bearing cup. Under the bearing on the head of the pinion or under the bearing cup. And I just want to make sure that there's no shims down here. There shouldn't be. They were shimmed under the cup when I took them out, but I'm just double checking. Getting a little low. But there you go. No shims underneath, as I suspected, but I always do this just to double check. Don't take anything for granted or assume anything when doing a rear end. So I got everything out and laid out. I kind of wanted to go through the correct order of this when you're disassembling it, and I got it laid out here for a visual. So you got pinion nut. There's a washer stuck in the backside of this yoke. So pinion nut, washer, yoke, seal, oil, slinger, bearing, race, pinion shim, pinion preloads, shims, bolt that was stuck between the bearings, not supposed to be there. Then you have the pinion depth shims. These were under the cup, but they can also be under the head of the pinion, does the same thing. Race, bearing, pinion. To drive these pinion races out, you use an oval or a brass punch. I like oval punches better than brass. They just seem to hold up better. You don't have to keep reflattening them. So now the housing's bare. I'm gonna get it cleaned up. Like I said when I was pulling the pinion bearing off, I'm gonna save these bearings as well as, or these shims, as well as the pinion depth shims. And this will give me a good starting point for my new gear setup. So stay tuned for details on this stuff. Got a lot going on here, and I'm gonna get this cleaned up, wire brushed, pads cut off, all degreased, and I'll show you the progress as I go with that. So I ran a thread chaser through all these holes, all the differential cover bolt holes. I also ran a tap and a thread chaser through the diff vent hole here, and also the brake line clip hole. They just kind of used like a self-tapping screw factory, and I actually drilled those out and tapped them to 5/16 18, so I can get a nice bolt in there, put some pipe sealant or something on it, and it should be good to go. Nice thing, these housings, the tube thickness is pretty thick, looks like about 1/4 inch, so I got lots of meat for a bolt to grab on. And I'm gonna take it outside and wire brush this thing now. Cut the pads off and then bring it in, degrease the inside, wipe down the outside, tape it off, shoot it. Probably not gonna, I'm gonna kind of lay out where the spring pads go. I won't shoot that section, but shoot the rest with paint, and then it'll be ready to install and set up. So I got the rear axle all cleaned up, wire brushed today, got the pads cut off. I have to fill in a couple little low spots from cutting the pads off, just prior damage, and then do the inside on this, and it's ready to start putting together. Ended up meeting a couple guys this morning and picking up a couple SM420s. One of the guys had this Dana 20. He insisted I take 2. So I got the 2 transmissions. I'm gonna drop them off here at my buddy Alger's, and hopefully you can get mine together this weekend sometime, and I can pick it up first of the week.